Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I didn't get into much of my background, but I've done most every job there is to do in a church over the years. I've been associate pastor of everything, worship, youth, discipleship, senior pastor. I lived in 3 countries. I've written 12 books. I have a family full of ministers. My uncle was the president of the International Baptist Theological Seminary in Prague, and my brother's was a past president of a seminary. My cousin is currently a seminary president. My brother is a professor at Dallas Baptist University. All my brothers are ordained ministers, and my sister is a missionary in Germany. My grandparents were missionary associates in Africa and in Zambia, and I got to go back to Zambia a couple of years ago to speak, and stayed in the same compound that they lived in back in the early 70s. So I grew up. My dad was a pastor, his dad was a lay pastor, church planter, and we trace our lineage back to Spurgeon's college, where two Blackabys attended his Bible college and trained in England as well. So and now my son, my oldest son, is training to be a pastor, so it goes on. And I have several nephews that are seminary trained and PhDs, and on it goes. So we kind of live, eat, and breathe ministry and kingdom work. So that being said, I did pastor an international church for, I guess I was overseas about 9 years altogether as a youth pastor and a senior pastor. And so I have a heart for ministry. I tried to discourage my son from going into ministry for many years, but he persisted. So he's right now training in, working on a master's degree in theology. And he's actually in Manila, the Philippines right now. His wife is a professional volleyball player, and she's got a contract with the Manila volleyball team, and they've got an apartment and a salary and everything else. It's an extended honeymoon, I think, because they were just married in December, and now they're 4 months in the Philippines, and my son's just playing. He's the husband touring around. So, but they found a church just down the road from their apartment. They went into this Baptist church, and my new daughter-in-law, she's 6'2", and so in the Philippines, she's quite a Goliath, and so they swarmed her because she's a professional athlete, and they wanted her autograph, that kind of a thing. Then they found out that my son's last name was Blackaby, and they said, "Do you know Henry Blackaby? The one who wrote Experiencing God?" Says, "Yeah, that's my grandfather." They go, "Oh," and they swarmed him, and they said, "Our pastor was the first one to bring Experiencing God to the Philippines." And our whole church is modeled after that idea of experiencing God. So he became the popular one. So I told my son, "Welcome to my world. Everywhere I go, my dad's book has gone before me." And so one of the things when I speak, I try not to. I don't talk philosophy, and I don't talk kind of ideals. I talk practical. What they say, where the water hits the wheel, or the wheel hits the road, or whatever you want to talk about. You'll find I will be somewhat transparent and honest, and maybe too honest, but I think that's the only thing that really helps other pastors, is being honest about ministry. I've seen the ugly side of ministry, and I've seen the beautiful side of ministry, and I've been in church splits. I've been in churches where we've had to kick members out because of adulterous affairs. I've been in a church where the pastor was having an affair with the associate pastor's wife. I've seen most of what happens in churches, and several churches that I used to be in no longer exist. They've folded or disbanded for lack of good leadership, basically. And so I want pastors to succeed. And when you leave a church, as I did in Stavanger, you pray that the next person who follows you will continue to build on the foundation you left there. And the next guy that followed me almost completely destroyed the church, and it almost didn't survive, and they had to fire him. I think it was about 8 months or 10 months after he came. And David stepped in to rebuild what had been and to almost restart. And so it was thank you, David, for coming in and investing in that ministry, because it was a strong church for many years, and now it's rebuilding back. And then the oil decline happened and all of that. You know how it goes. The cycles of international churches. So I want to talk about 4 characters in the Bible, 4 of the strongest characters in the Bible that I see as very influential. In fact, 3 of them are the people we talk about all the time. Well, all 4 of them are. 3 of them didn't end very well. But each of these people, I believe, have characteristics of leadership, I should say flawed characteristics of leadership. And despite their flaws, God used them in very extraordinary ways. The first one I want to look at is Moses. Someone you probably have heard about. But I see Moses in a different way. In fact, these 4 characters, I haven't done the study before. And maybe you've done this, maybe you've looked at each of these characters in these particular ways, but I want to use it in a way to maybe encourage you. And I'm glad we have a counselor here this week, because I'm hoping that some of the things we look at, you might realize maybe for the first time you are struggling in this area, and maybe you do need to talk through some things. But let's just look at Moses for a moment. He was a reluctant leader. He didn't want to be the leader that God asked him to be. He came up with excuses. But clearly God chose the right person to lead his people out of Egypt. But I see Moses as someone who likes the rules. He likes policy manuals. He likes church constitutions and guidelines to follow. Moses did things by the book. What better person could God choose to give the 10 Commandments, to give the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the entire rules for designing an entire society? This is the one he handed it to, and I think Moses ate it up. This is good. We've got rules, we've got instructions for setting up society and laws and rules for worship and policies for dealing with troubles and values, and he would help God's people follow the rules. Yes? I think so. Not only was he going to help the people do everything that was in the book and live by the book, but he would become their judge to make sure that they followed the rules. So it says in Exodus chapter 18 that people lined up all day long, came to Moses' table to be judged. He could help them understand what the rules are, how they're supposed to live, settle the disputes. This is right, this is wrong. It's like, this is what I do. God called me to be the rule follower. Do you have anyone in your church like that? Or, well, the Constitution says on page 13 in this section here that we are supposed to da-da-da. I'm like, So Exodus chapter 18, Moses' father-in-law Jethro comes to visit, and I think Moses was going to show off. Look how important I am. You know, when the father-in-law comes, you got to impress. Look how good I'm taking care of your daughter, you know, and look at all I'm doing. Look how important. Everyone comes to me all day long to get my advice and to help them follow the rules. And, this is just what I do because everyone knows how important I am. And what I like about Jethro's response, he says, chapter 18, verse 17, this thing that you're doing, it's not good. Moses can't win. Father-in-law's a little smarter. He says, you're going to wear away, both you and this people that are with you, for this thing you're doing is too heavy for you. You can't perform this alone. So he got other people to learn how to do the rules, and he passed it on to new people who would then judge the people. So they gave him a bit of a breather. But what I see with Moses is that he got distracted by the details and lost the big picture. What Moses failed to do in his ministry was help people know God. He helped them know the rules. He helped them follow the guidelines and the prescriptions for how to be a society, how to worship, how to treat one another, but he didn't help them know God. So in my church business meetings, how many of you love your business meetings? I've been in very, very painful business meetings where we're going line item by line item in the budget. How come there was $200 more spent in this line item than was budgeted for? And we have and then people get angry, and people start accusing, and people get mad, and people raise their voices. And I stop and I say, we need to take a break, because the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-discipline. And I'm seeing none of that at this time. In other words, the Spirit of God is not leading this meeting right now. There's another spirit here causing division and strife. I'm afraid that some of you are going to destroy your testimony here by demonstrating another spirit other than God's Spirit. Business meetings should be a worship service where God's goodness is celebrated. Look at all God has done among our people. Let's look at where God is leading us in the days ahead. Let's not get distracted by the details of a budget. The budget won't save souls. It just tells us how we're going to spend the money that comes in. It should be a place where our faith is tested and found to be pure. It should be a chance to trust God for the future as we embrace the vision God gives us. So Moses had a clear direction where he was going. He knew he was headed to the promised land. But he was distracted by the wilderness. They had to find water. They had to find food. They had to need protection against armies that wanted to destroy them. They lost sight of the promised land because of all the details along the way. You know what it says. All the people saw they complained. It says the entire congregation complained against Moses and Aaron. They lost sight of the goal, and Moses never taught them how to love God. He just taught them how to follow the rules. In fact, the people didn't love God. They were terrified of God. It says in Exodus 20, all the people saw the thunderings and lightnings, and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when people saw, they trembled and stood afar off. And they said to Moses, "You speak with us, and we will hear. But don't let God speak to us, because we will die." I don't know what kind of relationship they had with God, but it was one of trembling and fear, not of love. Rather than helping the people love God and serve God, they learned how to follow the rules for fear of punishment. Even Aaron's two sons, in Leviticus chapter 10, it says that Aaron's two sons brought unholy fire, or his own censer, placed fire in it and covered it with incense and brought it to the Lord. It was unauthorized by God. They did it on their own. I think they were trying to show off to their friends. I think their friend says, how come you don't get to ever bring incense? Why is it always up? Why is your dad doing it all the time, you know? Well, you know, when are you going to be a big boy? So, I think we can take incense into the Lord, and it says that the Lord's fire came out from his presence and incinerated them, and they died in the Lord's presence. More fear, because they broke the rules. So a very highly legalistic society grew up. You know, by the time of the New Testament, this society worshiped the rules. They worshiped the law. They didn't worship God anymore. It was follow the rules. The rules kept people away from God. Their God became the commands. In Exodus chapter 33, it talks about Moses going into the tent of meeting. When anyone sought the Lord, he would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And it says when he went to this tent of meeting, all the people would watch him. The cloud, a pillar of cloud would come down and stand at the doorway of the tent, and God spoke with Moses. It says God spoke with Moses as a man speaks to his friend. Nice, Moses, you got a friend in God. You can speak face to face, but what about the people? I see this in churches where, you know, we ask our people to pray about something. Big decision we need to make as a church. We're going to hire staff. We're going to relocate the building. We're going to start this ministry. We ask them to pray, but we never actually teach them how to pray. We don't teach our people how to hear from God. So we send them off to pray about this, and next week we're going to vote on it. They come back next week, whether they prayed or not, they may not even understand how to hear when God speaks to them. So they come back next week, and what they're voting on is not whether God said yes or no. They're voting on whether they trust you as a leader. They're trusting your integrity and your relationship with God. The people respected Moses' relationship with God, but they didn't know God. I think we fail our people when we don't teach them how to know God, how to hear from God. We tell them go pray, but we never taught them how to pray. We never taught them how do you discern God's will? How do you know when God's speaking to you? I don't know. I just think that, you know, the pastor must hear from God, so whatever he says, we'll just vote on that. What have we done? How have we helped our people to know and to love God themselves? When you first came into ministry, I don't know about you, but I had a lot of idealistic dreams. I had been an associate pastor under 4 other men, and I watched them, their flaws and their successes, and I learned a lot of stuff about what not to do. As a pastor, I learned a lot of good things to do. I would make my own mistakes, but I was way farther ahead than a lot of new pastors because I'd already seen how church works, been in the business meetings, been in the deacons meetings, seen the dissent and division and difficult times, but I didn't have to be the pastor. I could watch from afar, watch how the pastor led. Now that I was a pastor, I had all these dreams of being the best pastor, you know, and but then there's the dissenters. There's the people that stab you in the back. They're the people that criticize you, the people that oppose you when you're just trying to lead. And a lot of people that go into the ministry, their dream doesn't come true. They encounter a lot of unforeseen difficulties. Sometimes we stop dreaming. We look at the challenges in the wilderness. We lose sight of the goal. We stop dreaming. We stop casting a vision for the future, and we default to following the rules. Follow the 5-year long-range plan. Follow what the people want instead of going to God and leading the people. Exodus 16:2, it says, the whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron. Have you been in that position? Where the people that you thought were going to support you didn't. Where you felt alone. Where you felt like you're the only one that really cared about what God wanted to do. We can become very defensive as pastors because people aren't following. We can go into this bunker mentality where we're just trying to survive in ministry. Moses dreamed of leading his people when he was younger, but things didn't go like he planned. And now he's stuck with a bunch of grumbling, whining, complaining, critical people, trying to get them to the promised land, for heaven's sakes. And they want to go back to Egypt. But they didn't know God. 2 great things about Moses is that he had a heart for his people. When God had reached the end of his patience and declared his intention to destroy his people and start over with Moses, Moses intervened. And in Exodus 32, verse 32, it says, now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of your book which you have written. How many of us would ask God to put a curse on us instead of our congregation? I actually prayed, you're taping this. Edit this part. I actually prayed that God would kill someone in my church one time. He is the chairman of the deacons, and he was destroying the church. He was the head of the clan, not the clan, but he was the head of the family. About 3 or 4 of his family's kids were in the church, and he was opposing the pastor. He was mocking the pastor, sitting at the back of the congregation with his hands crossed, shaking his head at the pastor during the sermon. It was a divided church. And I said, God, if you would just, a heart attack, car accident, I don't know, if you just get rid of this person, we could actually grow as a church. We could actually move ahead. He is causing such... They bragged that they had seen 100, they had run off 100 pastors in the lifespan of their church. They said, God, this is not a godly man. Can you just, you're good at doing this kind of stuff, God. You can figure something out. And I told my dad about that, and he said, well, Tom, that's interesting. He said, just consider that you would want God to have as much patience with that man as you want God to have patience with you. And I said, okay, God, I cancel my request. But the man died within a year. I'm not, I just say, don't get on my bad side. So in the midst of all of this, grumbling and complaining and backbiting and criticism and people fussing and Moses had come, he'd given them the law, but it wasn't enough. It didn't satisfy anybody. And in Exodus 33, finally, he comes to God and says, look, I'm okay, I can move forward with your people under one condition, that you go with us, because we need you. And he's bold. He says, and I really can't ever get over this request. Moses says to God, show me your glory. He didn't say, show me the roadmap, show me where the water holes are, show me how to defeat the enemies, show me how to manage these people. He just wanted to see God's glory. And I never even bothered to do my well thing here. So take a pause, just put that on hold. So what do you notice about this well on the screen?
Vines, lots of vines.
You have to talk really loud.
There's lots of vines.
Lots of vines. What else do you notice?
It has a roof.
Okay.
Isn't it covered up?
Yeah, it looks like it's...
Well, what's missing?
There's
No bucket.
So this isn't actually a well for water. It's actually a wishing well. And from my tradition, a wishing well, usually you throw some money in and you make a wish, hoping something will come true. And you don't actually get water from these wells. It's almost like you're buying a wish by throwing a coin in. And usually I put some foreign currency that's in my pocket that I can't spend in my country anyway, so no loss. And I think a lot of people go into ministry with a wishing well kind of an attitude, that you just hope things will work out, that you pray things are going to be great. It's like you're always asking God for favors, but you're not really drawing deep from the well. And sometimes the water is really hard to get to. I've been in African villages where it's 100 feet down, and they're pulling ropes forever by the time the water finally gets up to the top. I want to talk about 4 different people and 4 different kinds of wells. And this well is the well of God's presence. Moses had to draw from the well of God's presence. He had to have the intimacy with God in order to move forward. The rules were not enough. The commands were not enough. He wasn't finding life with the rules. Interesting that he was able to help the people eventually in Exodus chapter 35. Something changed with the people. Something changed. Moses had come down from the mountain. He'd already berated them for making the golden calf. They were kind of set to move. They're going to establish now a tabernacle, a formal place of worshiping God. And this is interesting. In Exodus 35 it says, the entire congregation of the Israelis withdrew from Moses' presence. And every person whose heart moved him, and all those whose spirits prompted them, brought an offering to the Lord for constructing the tent of meeting, for all its service, and for the holy garments. Verse 22, both the men and the women came, all whose hearts prompted them, and brought brooches and earrings and rings and pendants and so on. Verse 24, everyone who could give an offering of silver and bronze brought it as a contribution to the Lord. Verse 27, the leaders brought onyx stones and stones to be set in the ephod and the breastplate, spices and oils for the light and for anointing the aromatic incense. And in verse 29, each Israeli man and woman whose heart was prompted brought something as a freewill offering to the Lord. Something had changed where they started to bring an offering to God. It wasn't just rules, now it was worship. But I think that Moses had become overwhelmed by the details, and so intimacy with God is what brought him back to center, brought him back to a place where he felt okay, like God was in control, like God, you are enough. If I have nothing else. In fact, I think that there is a danger of, asking to see God's glory, because God says no one can see me and live. I suspect that maybe Moses was saying, yeah, I don't even care about that. It's worth dying just to see your glory. Nothing else really mattered at this point. Interesting, he was described as a man who could speak with God face to face as a man speaks to his friend. Job was described, he was talking about, I was in the prime of life. God all-powerful was my closest friend. Abraham was called a friend of God. John 15, Jesus says, you are my friends if you do whatever I command you. Intimacy is both relational and spatial. Relational between two people, but spatial in terms of location. It says, draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. An intimate friend is someone you're close to. They know us at a deep level. Something happens to damage the intimacy, there's distance between the two friends. The spatial is impacted. We feel distant from them. Trust is so important with intimacy. The more we trust someone, the closer we get to them. When trust is broken, we are pushed away from them. Scripture shows us that God is intimate with those who trust Him. So when we have sin, we break that trust with God, and we feel far away from God, like He doesn't even hear our prayers. Or when we're disappointed with God, when He doesn't answer our prayers like we want Him to, we feel distant from Him, like we can't trust Him. Some people try to accumulate their intimacy through knowledge. Read more. Find out more about God. They think that nearness to God can be achieved through more information. Paul talks about those who worship what they do not know, but we worship who we do know. The American church particularly has more knowledge now than ever. I don't even have to open a book, a real book anymore. I can find anything I need on the internet and more. I can find 1,000 times more information than I need just on a few clicks. But it's not drawing us closer to God. More information does not create intimacy. Others try to get close to God through aesthetic experiences. This new generation is looking for more liturgy, apparently. Millennials like liturgy. And as evidence, my daughter is now attending a more liturgical church. She's abandoned the church of her parents, Baptists, because we're not liturgical, apparently. And she's gone to a more liturgical church that is more formalized. Some people like contemporary worship as a form of intimacy, but this type of inspiration doesn't create intimacy with God, even though it's professionally designed worship. Others like revivals. We need to pray for revival. I'll talk with some of you about that if you want later, but I just have a problem with that. Why have we prayed for hundreds of years now for revival in America and it's not happened? Why do we think that revival is the answer to all of our problems? Setting the stage for intimacy doesn't mean intimacy would happen. Have you ever been on a romantic dinner with your spouse, but you had a fight that morning? That's unresolved. You go to dinner with your wife or your husband at a fancy restaurant. This is maybe your anniversary or Valentine's Day or something, but you had a fight. And you hardly even spoke in the car. Why are you guys smiling at each other? you hardly even talk to one another in the car, and you're there supposed to have this wonderful romantic evening. And everything is said. The candles are going, the linen tablecloths and silverware, wonderful menu. My wife likes French food, French menu. But, she can't even look you in the eye because she's still mad, The setting doesn't create intimacy, the closeness, the forgiveness, the trust, the relationship is what will create intimacy. Hebrews says, draw near to God. I like 2 Chronicles 16:9, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to give strong support, to be right there with you, to lift you up, to care for you. Maybe Paul talks about this in Philippians 3. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of what? Knowing Christ. Everything to me is worthless compared to just knowing Jesus, my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of everything, counted it all as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him. He says, I have the righteousness from God that depends on faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. I had this, I wish you weren't taping this sometimes, but I have a relative that always says, we love you, when we talk to them on the phone, but that's as far as it ever gets. It's just have you ever had, we love you, we miss you. Yeah, you haven't sent me a birthday card or a letter or an email or a text or anything in years. Never came to visit. What do you mean we love you? What does that mean? Stop saying that. I don't know if you, action speaks louder than words. And this one person, I just want to say, don't just stop saying that until you actually do something that demonstrates what you're saying. At least one thing. But I haven't said that yet.
Send the tape to them.
So did you know that God has a love language? Dr. Julie Slattery says, what is God's love language? He says, he told the Israelites that they were wasting their time in their worship because they were not speaking his love language. Amos 5, I hate all of your shows and pretenses. I hate the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and solemn assemblies. All of their activities designed to worship God, he hated. Because his love language was an obedient and repentant heart. David says, you do not desire a sacrifice, or I would offer one. You do not want a burnt offering. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, O God, in Psalm 51. If you love me, obey my commands. It's interesting. Comes right back to the commands. Started off with Moses. The commands were meant to draw us into a relationship with God. But people stopped at the commands and never went to the relationship. Intimacy means giving all of yourself to what is most important to God. Worship will be how we express our love to God. But the commands, I wrote a book called The Commands of Christ, and I started off in the introduction by saying we look at commands as orders, like a military commander demanding you do certain things. I command you, follow my commands. It's like an order. But that's not what God was doing with commands. What God was doing was, for example, as a parent, if I told my son, don't touch that fire, you'll get burned. And he says, I can touch the fire if I want to. And I say, you can, but you will get burned if you touch the fire. Don't touch the fire. He says, I want to touch the fire. Okay, if you touch it, you're going to get burned. Ow! I got burned. I said, I warned you. I gave you a command to protect you so that you could enjoy life. Don't commit adultery. Well, why can't I commit adultery? Because you're going to destroy your marriage, you'll destroy your kids, you'll maybe get fired from your job, you will lose your friends and have to start all over again if you commit adultery. Well, I have a right to be happy, don't I? Okay, you committed adultery. There's consequences. Don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. But I have a right to these things. No, yes, you can do these things. I'm just saying, if you do these things, you will be a miserable person. You will destroy relationships. Sin will bring death to our relationship. You will be far from me. You continue to move your own way. I'm trying to give you life. We're going to talk about another character that broke almost all the commandments at the same time later on. His commandments brought life. They weren't punitive. They weren't restrictive. They were saying, walk in this way and you will experience amazing, abundant life. But it's all in the relationship. We obey God, and His commands give us freedom and life and experiences that are beyond our imagination. Moses had to move from the law to love. He had to move from the rules and regulations to relationship with God. But he had to also transmit that to his people. He had to help them to do that. And it probably devastated Moses when he broke the rules himself. He hit the rock twice instead of speaking to the rock. He broke the rules. It's like, oh, what have I done? And it cost him. It cost him because he demonstrated before all the people a disrespect for God. And God couldn't allow that from His leaders. How do we help our people have an intimacy with God? To know God, to love God, to move past the rules and regulations. I've got a chairman of my board who loves, we call him Mr. Binder, because he brings the Constitution and the bylaws everywhere he goes. And he knows, line by line. And I tell him, this document is not ordained by God. It is not inspired and infallible. In fact, there are several points of it that I find offensive and unrealistic and dysfunctional that I would love to change. That's who we are. I go, no, it's not who we are. It's a paper with words on it that we give to the government so we can have our tax-free status. And give receipts. It doesn't define us. God defines us. We are His people and His body. We need to move beyond the letters and the words on a page in a constitution and let us obey Him to lead us. That can happen if we teach our people to love God, to know God, to hear when He speaks. Do you know every vote in a church should be unanimous if everybody knows how to hear from God? We have the same Spirit in all of us. The same Spirit is leading and moving all of us and should bring us all to unity in our decision. If we are following and obeying and know how to hear from God, we should always have a unanimous vote. My opinion. If we know how to love God. What else do I have? Anything worth looking at? Let's see. Moses. Pray to Him that He would work in the hearts of His people to accomplish His work through His body. The focus is always on Him and not on us. I'm going to close our time with a prayer. In my next sessions, I'm probably going to be breaking you up into some small groups for a little bit of discussion and prayer as well. So this is just a bit of an introduction. I'm going to hit David, Elijah, and Paul are my other three characters I want to look at. They all have very different leadership issues that I think I see in myself, and maybe you can identify with as well. But let me close our time in prayer. Father, thank you that you use flawed people. Thank you that even when we mess up, you can bring glory through those events eventually, even though there's consequences sometimes of our actions. You can still redeem even the worst of actions. Thank you that you are in control. Thank you that you care enough about each one of us, that you want us to know you, and not just know you, but love you, serve you, to seek you, to have intimacy with you. I pray, Father, that this week that will be accomplished, to grow us in our intimacy with you, that we would know you, not just about you, that we wouldn't lead like robots in our church, following the rules, doing what all the church growth experts tell us to do in their books. But Father, we would set the books aside and seek you with all of our heart and soul and mind and strength, that you would be found by us, and that you would strongly support us as we seek and serve you. And Father, that our church members would know you and love you too, so that it wouldn't be a fight every time we try to do something and lead them, that we wouldn't find resistance, we would find agreement and unity and joy in seeking you together as a congregation and serving you and following you, even when it's making us nervous and afraid because it requires faith beyond what we have, that we would trust you. We would not be like your people in the wilderness that turned back from the promised land because it looked too hard. That, Father, you would lead us through by faith. Help us to be the leaders, Father, that may it be said of us as leaders that we helped our people know and love God, so that they could help their kids know and love God, and their grandkids know and love God. That generation after generation would see people that didn't just follow rules and tradition and religious activity, but that loved you and saw you do miraculous things in their own lives. This is my prayer. I pray in Christ's name. Amen.